Good afternoon. Thank you so much, James, for your kind words of introduction, and thank you for this invitation to speak in this new series. I am really honored to share my story with you today on my experience and my family's journey from Laos. So before I begin my story, I would like to provide just some current statistics and background information on the current situation, as well as some background information for the resettlement of Indo-Chinese refugees or Southeast Asian refugees. So as you know, according to the UNHCR Global Trends 2015, there is an unprecedented number of forcibly displaced people around the world, 65.3 million. Of these numbers, 21.3 are refugees, 40.8 million are internally displaced persons, and 3.2 million are asylum seekers. And 51% of the refugee population are children below the age of 18. And 86% of the world's refugees are hosted by developing regions. So Canada is regarded as a humanitarian and compassionate country. We have a long tradition of resettling refugees and other forced migrants through private and government sponsorships. In 2015, 30 countries admitted a total of 107,100 refugees. This is only 0.66% of refugees under UNHCR's mandate, so the numbers are relatively small. And in 1979 to 1980, Canada settled over 60,000 Indo-Chinese or Southeast Asian refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The Indo-Chinese refugees were often referred to as the boat people. Normally, this refers to the Vietnamese who were crammed into overcrowded boats going through the South China Sea to safety. Many drowned, and many were also attacked by pirates. So the horrific stories and images led to the resettlement of Southeast Asian refugees. There are several factors that led to this historic resettlement in Canada, including communities and organizations, people like Howard Edelman and Operation Lifeline, which created all of these different operations to assist and integrate the Southeast Asian refugees. Churches such as the Mennonites and Christian Reform, Mennonite Central Committee refugee assistance programs were also instrumental in helping refugees. Governments, and James mentioned earlier, Mike Malloy, who was the Director of Refugee Affairs, the Chief Coordinator of Canada's Boat People Rescue Operation. Ron Atke, the new Immigration Minister in Joe Clark's government in 1979. Flora MacDonald, Secretary of State for External Affairs, and MacDonald and Atke developed the matching one-for-one sponsorship formula. Legislations were also helpful in terms of this historic resettlement. We had the umbrella agreement as well as the designated class. So in March 1979, Mennonite Central Committee signed the first umbrella agreement with the federal government, allowing constituent churches and groups to sponsor refugees under Mennonite Central Committee, thereby expediting the private sponsorship process. The designated class, there was an Indo-China class based on the collective situation of each distinct group and not necessarily on the UN Convention refugee criteria. And so between 1979 and 1980, Canada took in 60,000 Indo-Chinese refugees. 26,000 were government assisted and 34,000 were private sponsored, according to Dirks. And between 1978 and 1981, Edelman says that the Indo-Chinese refugees represented 25% of immigrants to Canada, compared to the 10% of a worldwide response. And so here's a quote from Employment and Immigration Canada. Never before had Canada been involved in a refugee movement which arose so dramatically or persisted in such large numbers for so long. Never had the distances been so vast, the cultural differences so pronounced. Never had groups of Canadians motivated by conscience and a determination to relieve mass suffering, become so personally involved, and never before had they joined with their federal and provincial governments in a formal partnership to provide a new homeland for refugees. And so in 1986, the people of Canada received the UNHCR Nansen Refugee Award for outstanding service to refugees, the first one awarded to the people of Canada. And so many Southeast Asian refugees have successfully resettled in Canada since the late 1970s. Through government and private sponsorship, they received economic and emotional support from various agencies and communities. The story of my family's resettlement experience, however, was very difficult. The Vietnam War spilled over into Laos, leading to the secret Lao War. Between 1964 and 1973, the American Air Force dropped the equivalent of one B-52 plane load of bombs in Laos every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 9 years, making it the most heavily bombed country per capita in the world. In the most heavily bombed areas, almost 2 tons of bombs were dropped for every inhabitant, according to Urbali. That's a total of over 2 million tons of bombs dropped in this country. Mennonite Central Committee estimates 30% of the ordnances did not explode upon impact. Today, unexploded ordnances continue to plague the country. 25% of the country's villages are contaminated. The war caused about 10% of its population to leave and to resettle in other countries. And this week, President Obama visited Laos and toured the rehabilitation center that treats victims of bombs. He said that the United States dropped 270 million cluster bombs and 80 million remain unexploded. Therefore, he has pledged to spend 90 million on ordnance cleanup. And he said, according to the Associated Press, for the last 4 years, Laotians have continued to live under the shadow of war. The war did not stop when the bombs stopped falling. So as members of my family played key roles in the Royal Lao government, we were targeted by the communist government who took over power in 1975. My mother recalls during the war, bullets flying through the walls in our home and her scrambling underneath the beds for protection. Fearing being sent to Semana or re-education camp, we decided to escape across the Mekong River to Thailand. There were 5 of us in a canoe, just like the one you see here in this picture. My mother was 6 months pregnant with my younger brother. We brought 1 spare change of clothing, and my mom sewed gems into her clothes. There were huge boulders or rocks jutting out of the river, which made it a dangerous crossing, along with soldiers on both sides of the river who were given orders to shoot anyone attempting to cross. Whirlpools were also common in the river. In fact, our boat veered towards Thailand and we hit a whirlpool and our boat spun around and around and around. And I remember my older sister and I scooping water out of the boat as my parents worked hard to try and get us out of the whirlpool. We eventually made it to Thailand, where a Thai family took us in for the night and they hid us in their home. And the next morning, we walked for 12 hours to a military camp that was funded by the Americans. My father had to go back into Laos regularly as a spy, the price for living in the camp. A couple of years later, the Lao government threatened the Thai government with war if they didn't send all the Lao people back to Laos. My mom wanted to buy Thai citizenship, but was encouraged to go to a refugee camp instead. So we ended up going to Camp Bantong in Siang Khong, Siang Rai, Thailand. It is estimated that there were a few thousand people living here in this refugee camp. And this is a photo of me, my immigration photo. And our family was able to apply to resettle in the United States, France, Canada, and Australia. However, the Canadian plane came first, and our family wanted to leave the poor living conditions at the camp. And so our family arrived in Canada with only $5 left in our pockets. We arrived in Manitoba on December 16, 1979. We were sponsored by a small Ukrainian Catholic church in a rural southern Manitoba community. And here is an article that was written by the Steinbach newspaper, Carolyn, and they wrote a story about our arrival in Canada. At one point, it said that my mom sat smiling and nodding while my dad was a spokesperson for the family. In reality, my mom would have told my dad what to say and how to say it before the interview arrived. The journalists did write in the end that someday they may read the story and be amused by our misunderstandings and misinterpretations. We experienced extreme culture shock, coming from plus 40 degree weather to minus 40 degree was quite an experience for us. I remember my older sister and I, we looked outside and we saw this beautiful white fluffy substance on the ground and in the trees. So we decided to take off our shoes and socks and run into the snow. And immediately we ran back inside screaming. And so this was our first experience of snow in Canada. But nothing could have prepared us for our first home in Canada. Our accommodations consisted of a 3-room house with a wood-burning stove, no fridge, no running water, no washroom, only an outhouse. And above all this, it was located within the church's cemetery. So you can see in the picture here, this is where our house would have been located. And the cemetery, the tombstones are directly behind us. And so the mix of animism and Buddhism in Laos has a deep attachment to the idea of ancestor and house spirits. As children, we were very afraid of the ghosts that may be coming out of the graveyard at night. The priest made a joke one day, telling us if anyone knocks on the door at night, do not open it. And just down the street is a well. And you can see the sign on the left there that reads, untreated water, not to be used for drinking water. This was where my dad went to get water for us every day. Fortunately, my mom always boiled our water, and so we remained safe. So we had a very difficult resettlement experience. Our parents were sent to work with week, my mom to a sewing factory outside of town, and my father later to a chicken farm. And while they were at work, they were very worried about their children in living or staying in strange surroundings. And the children were sent to school and daycare, again, in a different town. And so we feared the ghosts from the cemeteries, and we had nightmares. We disliked bread and milk. I remember plugging our nose and drinking a glass of milk in one big gulp in order to get rid of it quickly. And our family was used to having rice 2 to 3 times a day. Here we had only bread and potato, and we had a hard time eating such bland foods. And communication was difficult as we did not speak English. And so my mom used the Thai English dictionary quite often, as well as nonverbal communication, such as drawings and gestures to explain what it is that she needed. My parents were not given an opportunity to learn English upon our arrival, as we were in a very isolated community. So our first year in Canada was extremely difficult, but we persevered and we moved forward with the help of a few key people. In the community where we lived, there were amazing neighbors who invited the children for weekly baths, who did our laundry for us, and who also provided transportation to school and to work. After a few months, we eventually contacted the Lao Association in Winnipeg, who came over to help translate the living conditions and to also help mediate whether we can move into a larger center. My mom was adamant about moving to a larger city where there would be opportunities to learn English, as well as having the children attend schools nearby. And there were women from Steinbach MB Church who helped my mom adjust to Canadian life by teaching her English, taking the children on outings so that my parents can rest, taking my mom grocery shopping. The Thiessens even co-signed our mortgage so that we can purchase our first home. And so this is a picture of Elda Thiessen, and who was very, very helpful to our family. In fact, she taught my sister and I piano and left the house open so that we can go and practice piano at the house after school. And so this is our first home in Steinbach, Manitoba. And so looking at this photo, the Steinbach MB Church also played a role in our adjustment and integration. In fact, they sponsored my mom's younger brother and sister and their families as part of the family reunification program in the mid-1980s. And this helped my mom with the loneliness that she experienced in coming to Canada. My mom could not get used to the extreme cold in Manitoba, so we kept moving west until we arrived in Vancouver in 1986. I met my husband at university, and through marriage, I instantly became a member of a huge Mennonite family. My father-in-law's parents had 18 children, plus 2 adopted children. I wondered how I would remember all their names and their spouses. And education has always been important in my family. My mother instilled a love of learning in us. So I enrolled at UBC and pursued a BA in psychology. I became the first person in my family and extended family to obtain a university degree. Upon graduation, I became interested in counseling psychology, and with the encouragement of Dr. John Friesen, professor of psychology at UBC, I began to take courses in counseling while my husband finished his master's degree. My husband received a job offer in Winnipeg, and we surprised my family by moving back to Manitoba. My mother in particular could not understand why I was moving back to this cold climate. To this day, she refuses to visit us in the winters. I hope to continue my master's in counseling psychology, but the program here did not meet my interests, so I pursued a second degree in conflict resolution studies at Menno Simons College at the University of Winnipeg. Here, I developed a keen interest and passion for conflict resolution and peace building. And then with the encouragement of Dr. Bernie Wiebes, the Conflict Resolution Program's founder and coordinator, I completed my master's in conflict resolution from the McGregor School of Antioch University in Yellow Springs, Ohio. In this program, I became more immersed in the theory, research, and practice of conflict resolution. I can't seem to get away from the Mennonites. Upon graduation with my MA, I applied for a position with Menno Simons College and became a faculty member of the Conflict Resolution Studies Department with a specialization in workplace and organizational conflict resolution. And then after I had my children and my children began kindergarten and grade 1, I decided it was time to pursue my PhD in peace and conflict studies. I truly believe that my experience of warfare, displacement, and resettlement have influenced my interest in the field of peace and conflict studies. I had an opportunity to pursue law and business administration, but continued to be drawn to the theory and practice of peace, nonviolence, and justice. Here I developed further interest in the macro aspects of conflict resolution, peace building, and reconciliation. Balancing family, a full-time job, and schooling could not have been possible without the support of my husband and children. So today, there is a new wave of boat people. This is a photo of the Rohingyas from Myanmar fleeing on boats across the Bay of Bengal, Andaman Sea to Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And today, an estimated 11 million Syrians have fled since the civil war in 2011, and 1 million have sought asylum in Europe. And none could forget the photo of Alan Kurdi, the 3-year-old Syrian boy found on the shores of Turkey last September. This heartbreaking and tragic story led people and countries to open their doors to resettling refugees. Seeing this picture reminded me of another picture. The girl in the picture, the napalm girl, Kim Pook, screaming, crying, running away from a napalm bomb which burned her skin. This bomb was dropped by the South Vietnamese planes in 1972. This photo too captured the attention of the world to the plight of Southeast Asian refugees. And so here are a couple of quotes, one from Guterres, who said that for an age of unprecedented mass displacement, we need an unprecedented humanitarian response and a renewed global commitment to tolerance and protection for people fleeing conflict and persecution. And Howard Edelman said that Canada today needs to be in keeping with Canada's strong humanitarian tradition to offer resettlement to refugees worldwide. I have been deeply impacted by my own experience and by my family's experience as refugees. And now I take a lot of interest in the stories of today's refugees. So when I was asked to chair and host the 9th annual Canadian Association for Refugee and Forced Migration Studies conference, I decided that it was really important to invite academics, practitioners, governments, policymakers, NGOs, communities, and others, and to create a space where they could analyze and discuss the current refugee crises in our world. So the conference, titled Freedom of Movement, Exploring a Path from Armed Conflict, Persecution, and Forced Migration to Conflict Resolution, Human Rights, and Development, took place this last May in Winnipeg. In the 3.5 days, we had over 350 participants from over 20 different countries. There were various keynote speakers from the Netherlands, United States, Canada, as well as international refugee law judges from all over the world. We had special guest speakers, Her Honor Janice Filmon, the Lieutenant Governor of Manitoba, Mayor Brian Bowman, and MP Robert Falcon-Ouellette, among others. And for the first time, we included 4 special exhibits. So some of the photo exhibits included bitter oranges, African migrant workers in Calabria, forced to flee, safe passage, Doctors Without Border, response to the refugee crisis. And the third photo exhibit was Making a Place for Refugees, that was done by the U of M architecture students. And last, we had The World is Our Emergency Room. So these mobile refugee camp clinics or tents were set up on the lawns at the university so that people can walk through and see what is done in those camps. And another new initiative at the conference was the development of a refugee course. And I developed this intensive course for Conflict Resolution Studies and Human Rights Department at the University of Winnipeg. And the students in this course were able to attend several of the conference sessions as part of their learning. In fact, Francisco Rico Martinez graciously taught the course. And this coming spring in 2017, I will be teaching a similar course at the Canadian School of Peacebuilding program at the Canadian Mennonite University. Future refugee projects. I've just been approached to be a part of the Hearts of Freedom oral history project of Southeast Asian refugees and their contributions to Canada. This will be anchored at Carleton University. And there are several partners, including Pier 21, the Canadian Museum of History, Canadian Museum Association, and the Canadian Immigration Historical Society. And I do want to take just a couple of minutes to share with you some of the work that I do in conflict resolution and peace building in Laos, Burma or Myanmar, and Thailand over the last 10 years. So in Laos, I was invited to help them develop their first peace building program in 2006 called Volunteers for Peacemaking. And this group was made up of students, NGOs, community members, professors, social workers. And to this day, the program is thriving, and it is called the Mitipat program now. I also conducted research on mediation and traditional conflict resolution in 3 provinces in Laos, working with local research assistants. And in Burma and Myanmar, I was invited to work with political leaders, NGOs, and civil societies in conflict resolution, peace building, and reconciliation in 2013 as the country transitions to a democracy. I do want to say one sentence about Myanmar. It has not received a lot of press recently, but it is a very exciting part of the world right now. Seeing a country that was governed by military dictatorship for almost 50 years transform into a democratic state is in a relatively peaceful process is something we should all be taking note of. Let's hope this continues. And Mark McDowell, Canada's ambassador to Burma, was also there to help us hand out certificates. And this past summer, I was invited to work with the Conflict Resolution and Reconciliation Department, the Thai Ministry of Justice, on cultural perspectives on conflict resolution and mediation, working with directors, senior officers from 19 provinces, senior officers from the Thai Ministry of Justice, staff from the National Office for Reconciliation and Conflict Resolution, and academics. We explored community justice processes and programs. And I have enjoyed much of my work here and overseas, and more I am getting involved in writing and editing, mostly topics related to conflict resolution in Southeast Asia. My first two books were published by Emerald Publishing and Routledge Publishing, and I am now involved as a series editor for Lexington Publishing. In presenting here today, I was asked to talk about my experience as a refugee, as well as what I'm doing now. I find it awkward to talk about myself, but I'm grateful to be able to share my story here today. Even more, I am grateful for the opportunities that have come to me as a Canadian. I arrived here with nothing, but learned quickly and worked hard to make the most of our opportunities. I am not alone. There are many Canadians who arrive like us, who are contributing to the Canadian identity and enriching lives. I celebrate those people who continue to give so much back to our communities and who are now helping the next group of refugees. And I look forward to seeing the refugees arrive, prosper, and add their own stamp to our culture. And so I would just like to conclude with Gandhi's quote, "The willingness of nations to work together, not just for refugees, but for the collective human interest is what's being tested today. And it is the spirit of unity that badly needs to prevail." So my hope is that we can address today's humanitarian crises as we did with the Indo-Chinese refugees, with open arms, hearts, and creativity for the 65.3 million forcibly displaced people in our world. Thank you.